I wasn't originally planning to make this video. I had a different video planned about gravity and clang drives. However, there was a lot of discussion on my last video that got me really excited to talk about this instead. If you didn't see my last video, it regards what appears to be a teaser for a new Space Engineers game, and the comments are full of discussions about a few key points in the teaser. As I read every single comment on my videos, please don't use that as an opportunity to comment something stupid. I've read all of your theories, and I think we've collectively cracked the code on some of the most important details in the teaser. So, let's take a look, shall we? Right at the beginning of the teaser, this text appears in the bottom left corner. It says, the Almagest system, 10,000 light years from Earth, and 11,983 CE, 0 AE. The majority of the discussion on the last video centered on this. Now, this was my mistake, as whilst we discussed all of this in the last video, I was a little bit confused about what AE stood for, and I mistakenly said that someone smarter than me would figure it out, which obviously invited people to take a shot at figuring it out. Recapping what I said in the last video, I believed that CE stood for Common Era, and Common Era is an alternative form of Anno Domini, AD. So today is 2024 CE. As we discussed in the last video, Space Engineers is set in 2077 CE. And if CE here stands for Common Era, that means the year that this teaser takes place in is 9,906 years after Space Engineers, which is a very long time. Now, many people connected the dots that this is nearly 10,000 years after Space Engineers. So the general theory was, as the speed of light, or at least just below the speed of light, is theoretically the fastest you can go, if we have moved 10,000 light years away from Earth, at just below the speed of light, it would take us roughly 10,000 years to get here. So maybe we were in cryosleep for 10,000 years or something like that. This would explain that whilst we're nearly 10,000 years in the future, the technology shown in this teaser appears to be roughly equivalent to what we have currently in Space Engineers, as we're effectively using 10,000-year-old technology to get here. Now, I did actually notice this and recorded a bit on it in the last video, but I cut it out because there was a flaw in this theory, and that's, yes, we've moved 10,000 light years, but if we left 10,000 years ago, that means we would have left in 1983. Now, obviously Space Engineers is an alternate universe, blah blah blah, lots of things are different, but the main thing we do know in Space Engineers is that the grid system that we use to build ships wasn't around in 1983. It was invented sometime between 2029 and 2032. The grid system is what we use in Space Engineers to place blocks, so the system we use to build ships in the game is also a system that exists in the lore of the game. It's not just a gameplay mechanic, and that's the reason why spaceships are so easy to build in the Space Engineers universe, because they have this system of universal blocks to build ships out of. This lore is all covered in a datapad added in the last update for Space Engineers, and I'm assuming that as this lore was added to the game recently, that it is definitely canon to the new game. There's actually a whole bunch of interesting details in this new lore, like a complete timeline from 2029 to 2077, but we'll cover that in a later video. Like and subscribe if you want to see that. Anyway, my point was that the grid system definitely didn't exist in 1983. This could be an explanation of why the grid system has changed in this new Space Engineers game. As we've covered in past videos, in this new engine, there is no small grid and large grid. There is one grid system that you can place large blocks and small blocks on, and even smaller blocks on. And I covered this new grid system and all the other features in this new engine in a previous video on this new Space Engineers, that you can see here if you're interested. So maybe because we left our solar system in 1983, our grid system developed completely differently to the one used in current Space Engineers? But that feels like a bit of a stretch. I would suggest a more likely explanation has to do with special relativity and time dilation. I'm not going to try to explain this in depth. All I'm going to say is that when you're moving really fast, like close to the speed of light, and you're moving at that distance, time gets a little bit funky. As far as I understand, this would mean that whilst we've moved 10,000 years, we wouldn't actually experience moving 10,000 years on the ship. We might only experience a 1-year journey inside the ship, whilst the rest of the universe carries on going that 10,000 years. That doesn't really explain the 100 years we're missing, but a lot of people said it in the comments, so blame them if that's wrong, not me. Even though there's this 100 years missing, I'm sure that this is the answer, that we have moved 10,000 light years at just below the speed of light, and that's why we're 10,000 years in the future. There's just that disparity of that 100 years we need to figure out. Okay, we've established that we're 10,000 years in the future, 10,000 light years away from Earth, and that CE probably means Common Era. I think we can almost lock that in as being 100% correct. But what does 0 AE mean? A very large amount of people suggested that AE means after Earth, mainly because it's used in the title of a film that came out in the early 2000s. Because 0 AE sits next to 11,983 CE, it would suggest that AE also represents a date. I think this would obviously lead us to the E in AE standing for era, and we kind of have some evidence to back this up. When Marek Rosa tweeted out this teaser, he said in his tweet, "A new era begins soon." And I think these words were chosen very specifically, so to me, that pretty much locks us in as this E meaning era, and that pretty much disproves this being After Earth. But if you're not convinced, I think another thing that disproves it being After Earth is the fact that it is 0, and that would imply that this is literally just happened. If we've travelled 10,000 years at near the speed of light, I would find it unlikely that Earth being destroyed or us leaving Earth has happened less than a year ago. So I'm going to discount that. I don't think this is After Earth. So if it's not After Earth, and we're assuming that the E means era, what do we think it is? Well, I think there's 2 likely answers, and they're both pretty much in the same vein. As this is 0 AE, it implies that whatever the AE stands for has literally just happened, like I said. So I would assume what it's referring to is our arrival here, so potentially arrival era, which I feel is unlikely due to the fact that it's not just AE for a year, it's AE for an entire era. So it'd be a little bit odd to be still calling it the arrival era 2,000 years later. So my guess would probably be Almagest era, and we're naming this new era after this new solar system we've entered. So we've just arrived in the Almagest system, and this new year format begins at 0 when we've arrived. Whilst we're talking about the Almagest, a lot of people were discussing the potential of multiple star systems due to the fact that it says Almagest system here, and I think this is unlikely for pretty much everything we've just talked about. If we've travelled 10,000 light years over 9,000 years, travelling to another solar system would probably be just as difficult. Our solar system is roughly 3 light years across, and it's even further to get to a neighbouring solar system, so it would take way over 3 years at light speed to get to other solar systems. And that's fine, cool, let's say we can do that, we can get 3 light years away. If we use our time dilation and special relativity stuff, that might not take 3 years for us the player, but it will take 3 years for everyone else. And that's not going to work for NPCs that exist in this solar system, and that's not going to work for other players in multiplayer, is it? Imagine jumping to another solar system and your buddies just watch as you do your moon night and wind the stars in the sky forward. So, as I said in my previous video, I think Almagest system just refers to this being a brand new solar system full of brand new planets for us to explore. And hopefully, because Almagest refers to a geocentric model of the universe, that will have orbiting planets or something in it. In the teaser, the engineer has this cable on his right hand side. Well, not always, but we'll get to that. My suggestion in the video was that this is some sort of tether that you attach to a ship, and then if the ship moves, or you get too far away from it and run out of hydrogen, you can always get back to your ship. You can just pull on the tether and get back. This could also double as an oxygen cable, so whilst you're flying around in space, you have this connected to your ship, and then the oxygen is piped through it to your suit, a bit like how it works for real life astronauts. My main thoughts for both of these ideas is that medieval engineers had ropes and pulleys like this, and as this new engine is iterating on those kind of ideas from space engineers and medieval engineers, I imagine this technology will be in this new engine, so presumably having ropes and cables will be a thing this new game can do. It doesn't necessarily have to be a tether or an oxygen cable, it could be a data cable or some sort of power cable, but the point is, this is such a weird detail to have in your suit that it has to be something functional that you as the player can use. One major thing that makes me think this is functional, as opposed to just being decoration on the side of your suit, is that in every single part of this teaser where the engineer appears, it is on its right hip, apart from on this shot here where it's on the left hip. The fact that this changes sides in the teaser could mean that there's some sort of left-handed mode coming in this new game, and because this is a tool that you use, when you switch to left-handed mode, it goes on the other side of the screen. Obviously the left-handed thing is a stretch, but again, the fact that this changes sides, I feel like this might be a very important detail that we've barely scratched the surface of. And I can't wait for it to be absolutely nothing, it's going to be great. So, the 2 biggest questions I think I've received on both of the videos I've done about this is what happens to the DLC you currently have as Space Engineers, and more importantly, when is this new game coming out? Whilst obviously I don't know the answers to either of these, I think we can infer a lot based on what we know is happening next year. Alongside this teaser for this new Space Engineers game, we were also shown a teaser of an update coming to the current Space Engineers next year as well. And I think it's fair to say that normally when a Space Engineers update comes out, we usually get a cosmetic DLC alongside it. So I would assume that that means we're getting DLC next year. And if we're getting DLC next year, I think that probably confirms that this is not coming out next year, and potentially some years after that. It says in the top left of all of this footage that this is alpha footage, and Space Engineers was in alpha for a few years. And as I said in the last video, as we currently have Space Engineers, and that Space Engineers is still receiving updates, I would assume that this new Space Engineers isn't coming out in alpha. Now obviously this is speculation on the fact that Space Engineers will be getting DLC next year, so if there isn't a DLC next year, maybe get more excited about this coming out. But if it does get DLC next year, I think it's safe to assume that whatever is happening, that Keen probably have a plan with DLC in mind. Whether that means that all the DLC blocks will just be in the new game, that there'll be some sort of pre-order pack that you get for free if you have the past Space Engineers DLCs that includes all of the DLC blocks, or maybe they have a completely different idea that I can't even quantify. However, I don't think we'll have to wait long to find out. On December the 5th, so next Thursday, there's going to be a big announcement to do with this project. So potentially all of the questions we've just asked could be answered, or at least we'll get more information on what this project is. We don't currently know how this information is going to be released, but regardless of what it is, I will definitely be covering whatever it is on this channel. So if you want to keep up to date with this new Space Engineers project, and anything else to do with Space Engineers, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to this channel to keep yourself in the loop. A special thanks to Clone, Briarrose, Tarantula Fudge, Summit, The Wildcat, The Whiskman, Splurgeburger, Penguin, Taurus 1834, and Banu. If you want to support the channel, you can do so by clicking the join button next to the subscribe button.